Daniel told me he couldn't marry me. An hour before our vows, while I was standing in my white dress, he whispered those words and walked away. 6 months later, I built something from the ashes of that heartbreak, and he came crawling back, only to find the door locked for good. Before we continue, I'd love it if you could hit that subscribe button and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. It means a lot and helps me share more stories like this with you. My name is Claire Whitman. I'm 32 years old, born and raised in the small Georgia town of Wayland. For most of my life, I was the dependable one, the girl people trusted to show up early, stay late, and keep everything together. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't chasing city lights or high-paying careers. What I wanted was simple: a home, a family, and a life built on love and stability. Before everything fell apart, I thought I had that. I worked as a preschool teacher, the kind of job that doesn't pay much but fills your heart when you see kids grow and laugh. My evenings were spent in a cozy rented cottage with creaky floors and ivy climbing up the porch rail. Daniel, my fiancé, was the piece that made my quiet puzzle feel complete. He was charming in that small-town way. Steady, good with his hands, the kind of man my parents adored. When he proposed, I thought my life had finally fallen into place. We planned a modest wedding, nothing extravagant, just close family and a few friends. My mama baked pies for the reception, my aunt drove all the way from Alabama, and my best friend Anna helped twist my hair into soft curls the morning of. I slipped into a simple white dress, borrowed a veil from my cousin, and tried to quiet the nervous flutter in my chest. Everyone told me I looked beautiful. Everyone told me Daniel and I were perfect together. But what they didn't know, what even I didn't realize at the time, was that my perfect little life was already balancing on a fragile edge. The man I thought I knew so well was about to prove just how wrong I was, and in losing him, I was about to lose the version of myself that believed love alone could hold everything together. I didn't know it then, but that fragile life was about to shatter. It started small, the kind of thing you almost brush off at first. Daniel had always been a little anxious in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Money was tight, and planning even a modest celebration felt overwhelming. But about a week before the ceremony, his tone shifted. He called me late one night, his voice low and uneven. "Claire, I just need some space. Things feel heavy right now. Don't take it the wrong way. I just need to think." I wanted to argue, to ask him what could possibly be heavier than the vows we were about to make, but I swallowed it down. This was Daniel. The man who fixed fences for our neighbors without being asked. The man who once drove 2 hours just to bring me soup when I was sick. If he said he needed a little space, I told myself it was because he cared enough to want to get it right. Still, his calls became shorter after that. A text instead of a conversation. A vague promise instead of details. "I'll handle it later, Claire. Don't worry, I'm fine." His words grew thinner even as my excitement tried to cover the cracks. Then, 3 days before the wedding, he showed up at my door, eyes shadowed, jaw tight. He pulled me aside, away from Mama's fussing and Anna's laughter. "Claire, there's something I need you to understand," he said, looking everywhere but at me. "Marriage is big. It's forever. And right now, everything feels like it's pressing down on me. I just need you to trust me. Promise me you'll trust me." Those words landed like both a comfort and a warning. I nodded, because what else was I supposed to do? Love meant loyalty, and loyalty meant trust. Even when the person you love doesn't give you the whole truth. I told myself it was normal, that nerves hit everyone differently before the big day. I even repeated his words back to myself as if they were a prayer. "Promise me you'll trust me. I promised." And that promise would turn out to be the sharpest knife he ever handed me. In the final days before the wedding, things should have felt magical. Last-minute decorations, family arriving, the sweet chaos of everything coming together. But instead, I felt a quiet unease creeping in, like a draft slipping under the door. Daniel grew harder to reach. Where once he'd called just to hear my voice, now my phone lit up with short, clipped texts. "Running late. Busy. Talk tomorrow." The kind of words that looked harmless but left my stomach twisted in knots. I tried to explain it away. Maybe work was demanding more of him. Maybe he didn't want to seem stressed in front of me, but every excuse I gave him felt thinner than the one before. One evening, I called just to check in. He didn't answer. An hour passed. 2. Finally, a text buzzed through. Sorry, phone died. Talk later. But something about it rang false. He never forgot his charger. He was the kind of man who carried jumper cables in his truck for other people. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I stayed up brushing powdered sugar off the sleeves of my dress Mama had laid out, staring at my phone, waiting for a call that didn't come. I told myself not to panic, that men get cold feet, that nerves make people act strange. But deep down, I knew something was shifting, and not in the way I wanted. Even Anna, my best friend, noticed. She caught me pacing the hallway and raised an eyebrow. Claire, you sure everything's okay? He's been acting distant. I forced a smile, brushing it off. He's just nervous, that's all. But the words tasted hollow in my mouth. That was the moment doubt settled in, a quiet but heavy presence that refused to leave. I didn't have proof, not yet, but I could feel the edges of my world trembling, threatening to split. Looking back now, those tiny cracks were the warning signs. But I smoothed them over with trust, the same way you smooth a wrinkle in a tablecloth and pretend it isn't there. I told myself tomorrow would be better. I told myself he'd show up. I told myself lies. The morning of my wedding should have been filled with joy. Instead, it became the moment everything I thought I knew shattered. I was already in my dress, the white fabric soft against my skin, my hair pinned in curls that Anna had carefully twisted for me. Mama was fussing over lipstick in the mirror. Daddy walked in with a fresh cup of coffee, and the room hummed with the soft clatter of dishes being set for guests outside. The folding chairs were lined up on the lawn. Balloons swayed gently in the spring breeze. It looked like the beginning of forever. Then my phone rang. I smiled as I answered, expecting Daniel's voice full of nerves or maybe excitement. But what I heard instead was silence, just the sound of him breathing on the other end. My chest tightened. "Daniel?" I whispered, forcing cheer into my voice. And then, carefully, like the words themselves might break me, he said, "Claire, I can't marry you." The world tilted. My knees weakened as if the floor had dropped out beneath me. The phone slipped from my hand and landed with a soft thud on the wooden floor, but it may as well have been a thunderclap. Mama turned, blinking. "What's wrong?" Daddy froze mid-step, coffee trembling in his hand. For a second, no one moved. The silence was unbearable, like the air itself was waiting for me to explain. My lips finally parted, the words choking out. "He's not coming." Mama's head shook furiously. "That's not funny, Claire. Stop joking." "I'm not joking," I whispered, my voice breaking. "He said he changed his mind." The room erupted. Mama's sobs, Anna rushing toward me with open arms, Daddy staring like he was trying to figure out how to fix an engine that couldn't be fixed. But I couldn't be touched. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped everything out of me and left a shell in a white dress and borrowed veil. I turned toward the window, watching my little cousin scatter flower petals across the grass, balloons bobbing cheerfully in the sunlight. The world looked so normal, smelled of peach pie and springtime, but inside, my life had collapsed. That was the moment the girl who trusted promises died, and the woman who would rise from those ashes began to stir. The hours after Daniel's call blurred together like a bad dream. Relatives whispered in the kitchen. Mama was on the phone trying to figure out how to undo a wedding in under an hour. Daddy sat in the corner, staring at me with that same look he gave broken fences, as if he wanted to fix it but didn't know how. And me? I just stood still, hollow, breath shallow. The world around me kept spinning, but I wasn't moving with it anymore. That's when my phone buzzed again. It was Aunt Margaret, the tough one in the family. The kind of woman who didn't cry, didn't fuss, just said things straight. Her voice came through calm, almost matter of fact. "Pack a bag, Claire. Come stay with me for a while." I didn't argue. I didn't even take off the dress. I walked out the front door barefoot, veil still clinging to my hair, and stepped into the Georgia sun like a ghost. I boarded a bus to her town, my heart in pieces, but my mind already beginning to stir. Somewhere between the open fields and tin-roof houses passing outside the dusty bus window, I made a quiet decision. If Daniel could break me with one phone call, then maybe I'd been leaning too hard on someone else to define who I was. Maybe the only way forward wasn't begging for answers, but building something of my own. At that moment, the tears finally came. not because of him, but because I realized I was free. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to fight my way back. Not with shouting, not with revenge fueled by rage, but with something stronger, patience, grit, and a steady fire he could never put out. If you've ever been in my shoes, wondering if someone you love is taking advantage, stay with me. The way I turned the tables will surprise you. And hey, if you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe so you never miss what happens next. A few weeks passed before I could even bring myself to see Daniel again. I stayed with Aunt Margaret, sweeping out the dust of her old guest house, trying to silence the echo of his words in my head. But silence has a way of sharpening pain, and the questions gnawed at me. Why? How could he do this? Finally, I decided I deserved answers. I wasn't going to let my story end with a phone call and a white dress left hanging in a closet. I called him. At first, he didn't answer. Then, finally, he picked up with a voice that sounded almost casual, like he'd been expecting this moment. We agreed to meet at the diner on Main Street, a place where once we'd shared milkshakes and laughed over cheap fries. Now, the booths felt like a battlefield. He slid into the seat across from me, his shirt wrinkled, his smile weak. "Claire," he said, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't left me standing at the edge of forever with nothing but silence. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady. "Why?" he sighed, leaning back, eyes drifting out the window. "It just didn't feel right. Marriage is heavy. Too heavy. I panicked." I clenched my fists under the table. "You panicked an hour before our vows, when the guests were already arriving?" His shrug was like a slap. "Would you rather I went through with it and then divorced you later? I saved us both the trouble." That was the moment I realized he wasn't sorry. Not really. He wasn't thinking about me or the humiliation I carried. He was already rewriting the story, so he came out the noble one. I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping the floor. "You didn't save me, Daniel. You broke me, and one day you're going to regret underestimating me." His smirk told me he didn't believe a word. That smirk sealed it. Plan A, reasoning, confronting, hoping for closure, was dead. If I was going to reclaim my life, I'd need something stronger. After that diner meeting, I stopped looking for closure. Daniel had made it clear. He wasn't sorry, and he wasn't going to give me the dignity of an honest explanation. That smirk of his had told me everything I needed to know. In his mind, I was weak, discarded, something to move past. But he didn't know me anymore. Back at Aunt Margaret's, I spent long nights thinking about what I still had left. My savings account, carefully built from years of teaching. My name, my reputation in town, the trust of the people who knew me as someone steady and hardworking. And, maybe most importantly, I had the truth. While Daniel wanted to pretend his betrayal was noble, I knew the reality. I'd seen the late-night calls he tried to hide, the unexplained withdrawals from our joint account, the way his story kept changing each time he opened his mouth. He hadn't just left me. He had been planning his escape long before the wedding day. So I made my decision. If I couldn't change what he did, I could change how the story ended. Quietly, methodically, I started putting the pieces of a new life together. The old bakery in Willow Creek, the Magnolia oven, had been sitting empty for years, just a brick shell of what it once was. But when Aunt Margaret showed it to me, something inside stirred. It was broken, yes, dusty, forgotten, but so was I. And if I could bring it back to life, maybe I could bring myself back too. I filed the paperwork. I scrubbed the counters. I taught myself to bake until my arms ached, until flour dust coated my skin like armor. And when I finally opened the doors, neighbors began to trickle in. Then lines formed on Saturdays. Daniel might have thought he left me with nothing, but every loaf I pulled from that oven proved him wrong. They thought they'd won, but as you'll see, when Daniel told me he couldn't marry me, and I built a life without him, I made sure it cost him everything. It didn't happen all at once. The bakery grew like rising dough, slow, steady, unstoppable. At first, it was just a few curious neighbors buying sourdough loaves and cinnamon rolls. Then Cheryl from the general store began spreading the word. By the end of the month, Magnolia Oven wasn't just a dusty relic of the past. It was alive again, filled with warmth, with the smell of butter and sugar and hope. And then, one Saturday morning, I saw him. The crunch of gravel outside made me glance up from the counter. An old silver sedan pulled into the lot, one I knew too well. My stomach dropped, but my hands kept working, sliding a tray of honey oat loaves onto the rack. The doorbell jingled, and there he was, Daniel. Same hesitant half-smile, same slouched shoulders, but thinner, paler, like life hadn't been kind to him since the day he ran. "Claire," he said softly, eyes darting around the shop, as though trying to understand what I'd created. I crossed my arms, standing tall behind the counter. "Daniel." He shifted on his feet. "I was just passing through." His voice was thin, an obvious lie. He'd been watching, I knew. Maybe he'd even heard the town whispering about the runaway bride who turned an old bakery into something worth lining up for. I didn't invite him in, I didn't offer him bread. I just let the silence press down on him until he finally spoke. "I know I messed up. What I did, it was unforgivable. But I'd like to fix it if you'll let me." A bitter laugh almost escaped me, but I kept it inside. "You don't get to fix this. You don't get to walk away and then walk back in when it suits you." His face tightened, but I saw the flicker of regret in his eyes. For the first time, he realized what he had lost. "If you think that stung, wait until you hear what happened next. It was worth every second of planning." And if you're still here with me, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and subscribe so you won't miss the ending. Daniel stood there in the doorway of Magnolia Oven, looking like a man who'd stumbled into the wrong life. For a moment, I saw the boy I used to love, the one I thought I'd grow old with. But all I felt was distance, like staring at a stranger who happened to wear a familiar face. "I just miss you," he murmured, eyes lowered. "I miss what we had." I leaned against the counter, steady as stone. "What we had? You mean before you decided I wasn't worth showing up for?" His jaw clenched, and he shoved his hands into his pockets. I panicked. Everything felt too big. I thought, maybe we could try again. That was when I finally laughed. Not cruelly, but with the kind of freedom you only find when you've stopped begging for love. "Tell me something, Daniel. Did you fall back in love with me? Or did you just expect I'd stay frozen in time until you changed your mind?" The question hit him harder than anything else I'd said. He blinked, searching for words, but there weren't any left. And that's when I knew my revenge was complete. Not in anger, not in shouting, but in the quiet fact that I no longer needed him. He had walked out of my life believing I'd crumble. Instead, I rose higher than he ever imagined. He turned to leave, shoulders slumped, dust trailing behind his car as it pulled away. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just breathed deep, the smell of cinnamon and warm bread filling the air, and felt something inside me finally loosen. Because this bakery, this life, this strength was mine. When Daniel told me he couldn't marry me, he thought he was ending my story, but he didn't realize he was handing me the title instead. He said he couldn't marry me, so I built a life without him, and it cost him everything. After Daniel drove away, I stood in the bakery for a long time just listening. The ovens hummed softly, the air was warm with sugar and yeast, and for the first time since that phone call months ago, I felt completely steady. The man who once had the power to shatter me had just walked out, smaller than he'd ever been, and I didn't chase him. I didn't beg. I let him go. Word traveled fast in a small town. People whispered, of course, they always do. But the whispers didn't sting this time. If anything, they carried a kind of respect. The woman Daniel left in a white dress hadn't curled up and disappeared. She'd turned a forgotten building into the beating heart of the community. Customers kept lining up, not just for bread, but because they wanted to be part of something that felt alive again. Even my parents, who had watched me collapse on that wedding morning, started to see me differently. Mama once said to me, "Claire, I thought I'd lost you that day, but what I see now, you're stronger than I ever was at your age." Daddy, a man of few words, just patted the counter one evening and said, "This is solid, you built this." That was his way of saying he was proud. And Daniel? From what I heard, his story didn't age well. People saw him for what he was, a man who ran when things got real. He tried to frame it as being honest and brave, but in truth, it only made him look weak. The man who left me at the altar became the man who couldn't hold on to anything. The biggest consequence wasn't his, though. It was mine. I no longer measured my worth by someone else's promises. I no longer feared being alone. I had drawn a line in the sand, and I knew I'd never again let someone cross it without earning the right. Because sometimes the harshest betrayal leaves behind the clearest boundaries. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if Daniel hadn't made that call. If I had walked down that aisle, smiled for the photos, and promised forever to a man whose heart was already halfway out the door. Maybe we would have lasted a year, maybe two, before the cracks showed. Maybe I would have spent years trying to hold together something that was never meant to last. As painful as that day was, I see now that it saved me. His betrayal stripped me bare, but it also forced me to find out who I was without him. And what I discovered was someone stronger, more capable, more alive than I'd ever imagined. The Magnolia Oven isn't just a bakery anymore, it's proof. Proof that I can build something beautiful out of ashes. Proof that love doesn't have to come from someone else's approval, it can rise from your own two hands. Every loaf I pull from the oven, every smile from a neighbor, every Saturday line that stretches out the door, it all reminds me that being left behind wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. When Daniel stood in front of me asking for another chance, I realized the sweetest revenge isn't shouting or tearing someone down. It's standing tall in a life they no longer belong to. He expected me to crumble. Instead, I created something so solid that he couldn't even touch it. And that's the truth I carry with me. Sometimes saying no isn't cruel. It's the kindest thing you can do, both for yourself and for the person who never deserved your yes. So here's my lesson. For anyone who's listening, don't be afraid of endings. Don't be afraid when someone walks away, because sometimes life breaks you open not to destroy you, but to let something new rise from within. Daniel thought he ended my story when he said, "I can't marry you." But he didn't end it. He only set the stage for me to become who I was meant to be. And now I don't just survive, I thrive.